Assalamu alaikum. My name is Maharuk Sheikh, and I bring to you Symmetry Group's Narratives Transform, a Women's Day special, where we challenge, explore, and deep dive into the hot topic of today's podcast, which is equity versus equality. And to shed light on this matter, we have industry's experts from the marketing and the advertising fields. Please welcome Mr. Khurram Kidwai. He is the CEO of Local. And then with him, we have Anjum Rahman. She is the co-founder and COO of Local Bites. And next to me is Saad Akhtar, the head of digital marketing at HBL. And of course, Afshin Rizavi. She is the general manager at PAS. And with her is Qamar Abbas, the executive director at PAS. And next to him, we have Uzma Khan. She is head of B2C Ecom Unilever Pakistan. That was a mouthful. And then we have none other than Amna Saeed, the GM at EBM. Thank you guys for coming and joining us on this Women's Day special. मज़े की बात यह है कि जब हमसे कहा गया कि भाई Women's Day के लिए कुछ करते हैं, एक पोस्ट बनाते हैं, तो हमने कहा ठीक है, सही है. But then we are a Symmetry Group. We tend to do things a little differently. So we then thought about ठीक है, it's embracing equity this time around. उसके ऊपर हम क्या कर सकते हैं. तो एक के बाद एक जब हम सब ने एक दूसरे से conversation start की, पता चला we all had varied opinions about the topic and the theme itself. And then that made for a very interesting conversation. And then the idea came कि भाई why not have a podcast with people that we feel would definitely bring some more meat to the conversation and then something that we can take जो हमें help करे अपने narratives को transform करने में, obviously for the better. So firstly and foremostly, I open it to the floor. What is equality? What is equity? And what do we understand by it? Do you think कि कोई इसमें फ़र्क है इन दोनों में? Are they interchangeable, synonyms है एक दूसरे के? What is that one thing that sets them apart? And if Amna, if you could help us.
So I find an analogy a great way of understanding the difference between the two. It's like there's a race, it's a fair race if there's a start and finish line that's equal. But if one of the participants is asked to carry a load of bricks and compete against other people who are not carrying that roll of bricks, then I ask, is it fair? Right? And that for me is the difference between equity and equality. Equality is about setting the same finish line, but equity says we need to see if people are burdened more than others. And for me, equity needs to be achieved before you start a conversation on equality. And I feel where we are in Pakistan, whether it's the corporate sector or just society in general, we need to have conversations on equity before we start talking about equality.
I think that's a very fair point. Khurram, would you like to add something to that? Because I think Amna very aptly pointed out कि equality तो तभी आएगी जब हम equity को understand करेंगे और उसको हम लोग embrace करेंगे.
No, I would only second that. I think equality and equity, I think the way I think about it is chalk and cheese, right?
Yeah.
They're very different. Equality, like she said, means you give everyone the same surface to play on, without recognizing the barriers or the challenges that the individual may have. And I think what equity does is it does that with context. So there's a context where, in her case, there's someone who is probably carrying a load of bricks and hence cannot run at the same pace as maybe the guy next to him. And essentially recognizing those differences in different contexts, generally, I mean, we're talking gender biases. But I think whether it's race or any other form of discrimination that the society has today, I think all of these things need to be studied in context. So for me, I think they're two very, very different concepts. And I think we need to grasp equity and understand what it truly means before we become an equitable society.
So I find that very interesting because I've read recently, because we were diving into the topic itself, कि MNCs में और जो global infrastructure है उसमें वहाँ पे corporate sectors में this has been really been part of their you could say narrative, and they are working towards it very aggressively. And MNCs में women का जो C-suite के अंदर integration है that we are seeing. So Uzma, I'd like you to comment on that. How do you see the gender diversity coming up in terms of either equity or equality? within the MNC infrastructure?
देखिए, as far as I see it, I think gender diversity is still being built up. Really, I think अभी भी बहुत gap है. When you talk about are there equal opportunities or not even just equal opportunities, क्या enough blend of men and women है in an organization together? You will still see a lot more men perhaps than a lot more women. And I think the reason is perhaps just this, that a lot of times the circumstances that maybe women are working in are perhaps not taken into account, which should be. That's exactly where we talk about equity more than equality. An equal opportunity should be given to everyone. That's fair, but you need to take people's certain personal circumstances into play as well. And that's where I think, I'm not saying आप preference the women को उस हिसाब से, not talking about something like that, but I do feel that women in our society have a lot more duties and a lot more chores and a lot more tasks than men do. I mean, I don't think इस पे मेरा ख्याल से कोई disagree नहीं करेगा. And I think those differences and those added responsibilities should be respected. And so therefore, keeping those in mind, उनको उस तरह की आपको opportunities देनी भी चाहिए, and you should actually work towards them. And therefore, gender biases and जो gender equality की जो बात कर रहे हैं, that's how I feel it should sort of come into play.
So I'll just add on to what Uzma was saying. So हम हमेशा एक comparison वाले mode में ही क्यों जाएं? Equality and equity could come hand in hand also. ऐसे नहीं हो सकता कि equality है और साथ में equity भी उसको balance कर दें. ज़रूरी तो नहीं है हम हर दफ़ा एक versus वाली चीज़ situation में आए. It could be a balanced kind of a thing, या मुतवाज़न लेके चले. Because equality is giving equal opportunities to everyone, without any races, biases हटा करके, gender biases हटा करके, differences हटा करके. But then equity is, kind of balancing it. आप उसको एक साथ में लेकर चलें. So doesn't have to be a versus kind of a situation.
So I'm liking where the conversation is going. So far we've had that there, apples and oranges, and here we have a point of view that says that, it's something in parallel, in tandem.
I think कभी हमने उस तरह सोचा नहीं, या हमारे verbatims उस तरह से develop नहीं हुआ है. Because हम हमेशा कहते रहे equality होनी चाहिए, equality होनी चाहिए, equality होनी चाहिए. But कभी हमने ये इस angle से सोचा ही नहीं कि equality के साथ equity भी matter करती है. So maybe they can just go hand in hand. We need to build that right from the start.
I'm going to jump in here. I think it's a paradox. I think equality and equity are actually paradoxes. I think when you're in your pursuit of equality, you actually create a lot of disparity. And because you're trying to make sure that all the rules are the same for everybody, and when you're trying to ensure all those equal numbers, you're actually marginalizing people and actually impeding their growth, because you're not taking into consideration the fact that the same rules that apply to me may not, as you said, the burden that women carry,
may not be applicable.
Correct. And so therefore I personally think that, and my belief actually is that equality की pursuit में आप जो आप काम करना शुरू करना चाह रहे हैं वही चीज़ को आप नहीं कर पाते, because you're trying to generalize and enforce a concept or enforce a rule or for everybody, when everybody is actually very different. And I think what equity does, it actually humanizes workplaces. And it brings in the human element, because our individual situations are all very different. And when you start talking about your policies or your workplace being one with equity in it, then we take those little nuances into consideration, which I think otherwise you miss.
And उसके basis पे आप बहुत सारा talent भी खो देते हैं. I read like a really good quote today, that equality is making sure that everyone has a shoe to wear, but equity is that the shoe should fit.
Exactly.
And that's which I think कहीं ना कहीं वो side track हो जाती है वो बात कि as long as we have a right gender balance, all of this, that, and other, we kind of tend to forget कि जो individual nuances हैं वो कैसे जा रहे हैं. And sometimes you can become strict in your way of evaluating people.
and you kind of like get blindsided by that, but no, you know, if he is इसके लिए अगर ये rules हैं तो इसके लिए भी ये होने चाहिए, but कभी कोई नहीं हो सकते हैं, हर एक का अपना एक you know एक capability का भी एक है, and then how much burden can you take because of your personal circumstances?
Right.
I think there should be
From an
taken into
organizational
consideration.
perspective, you should also think of maybe slightly reframing this conversation. Equality is about input, and equity is about outcomes. So input is what opportunities are you giving to your people, right? What are you providing them for them to succeed, right? Outcomes is making sure that everyone has the opportunity to arrive at the top or at the end of the race, right? If you focus on the outcomes, and this is what businesses do. Businesses
in their
focus on
own
the
pace, that
Sure,
also.
but giving them the requisite support to arrive there with everybody else.
Enabling them, basically.
Lightening
Yeah,
the
yeah,
burden.
enabling
What are those?
environment.
What are those factors that support and enable the outcomes to be equal, the outcomes to be the same, and that's the difference from an organizational perspective. But the challenge always becomes understanding differentiated needs, because we're built, our society and our structures are built for, let's say, horses, and we're not thinking of horses for courses. Everyone's just a horse or a mule, and you're supposed to pull your weight, right? But I think Amna's analogy is the perfect way of looking at it, which is we're not all the same, right? And that's yes, today's conversation is about gender, but it's equally important to talk about education, equally important to talk about disabilities, right? And the same conversation will become relevant. When we start having this conversation specific to one certain agenda, then we're also hindering ourselves.
Exactly.
Right? So I think everyone sort of expressed it as well. Equity first, equality. Once you've arrived at everyone's now able to achieve the same outcomes, now let's give
Move towards
give
it.
them greater opportunity to increase what those outcomes might be.
Exactly.
You know, for me, very honestly, I see it from a very different angle. For me, we shouldn't, at stage one, we should not strive for equality. Because, and again, seconding what Anjum, you said, equality actually compromises equity. So I think the first step should be equity. Equity will automatically lead to
Correct.
equality. Because equality is also about meritocracy, which sometimes in our society and in every society, whether you see West, which is developed countries, and you see us, sometimes it doesn't work. Actually doesn't work. और जो inequality हम society में देखते हैं ना, it's perhaps because of the equality. Because we struggle more on, or we focus more on equality rather than equity. So I think that should be our pursuit, you know, equity.
Can I twist this up a little bit?
I'm sorry?
I'll twist this up a little bit.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is why we called you.
Yeah.
Equality is created by the privileged. If you have
Of course.
privilege,
Yes.
बिल्कुल.
men, let's say, or rich people, let's say, they've said, we'll give everyone equal opportunity. We'll give the same input to everybody, and therefore everyone
Right.
should be treated. That's fairness.
Not realizing that the starting point for people are different.
Yes.
For them it's different, and for a person
So
from
when
a different background
people
is
with
different.
privilege have created this narrative
Yeah.
on
Of course.
equality, that's where
Yeah.
the need for transformative change and bringing it to
Yeah.
equity comes in. That's why this conversation becomes a
और
lot
मुझे
more
यही
pertinent.
लगता है कि कॉर्पोरेट्स को भी इक्विटी पे ज़्यादा जोर देना चाहिए rather than equality. And I don't know whether the corporate actually do it or not. Do they stress on equity or not? It's good to say, it's good to take these terms, it's good to, you know, but actually walk the talk, whether they do it or not. Equality, yes, everyone does. But that doesn't work.
I think
actually.
even equality भी हर जगह नहीं हो पाती है सही
Yeah.
से.
अच्छा,
Even
equality
that,
में
that is also
Yeah.
an area of development really. हमें equity होनी चाहिए पहले, लेकिन you know I mean ना equality है ना equity भी नहीं है हर जगह. So
उसमें एक
It's
और
not
भी चीज़
always
है
the case.
कि ज़रूरी नहीं है इक्वालिटी भी जो हम we strive for equality on every layer. So say for example, if you see an organization, so आप लोगों के पास एक marketing department, एक HR department, assumingly एक आपके पास advertising department है, ज़रूरी नहीं है you have to have, let's talk gender, equal gender in every department. There's a different skill set, there are different needs of people. Madani, it's proven by studies that men, women, men from different areas, men from different continents, men from different geography, they are different. So हो सकता है कि आपको एक जगह एक टाइप के लोग मिलें और एक जगह एक टाइप के लोग मिलें. You don't have to, just for the sake of equality, fill that space with all those people.
I actually fundamentally disagree.
I disagree with that.
Fundamentally disagree with it, and I think that what you have as society is an outcome of your unconscious biases and societal norming that's happened. And I think there is a huge barrier to women in so-called non-traditional roles, and that's just being continuously through different barriers which are social, other words we're not supposed to use, being constantly established as the norms for genders, right? So why is it okay for women to be in, just using a corporate example, why is it acceptable for women to be in HR but not in manufacturing? Why?
Of course, you're right.
And is it because women are inherently not good at manufacturing? No. It's because as a society we have not enabled, and as organizations not necessarily enabled, those areas to be developed, and that's where equity comes in, right? Because by terms of equality, this is all okay, right?
Actually, no.
And equity, you need to ensure that. I mean, I think that where we are as a society, right? We're very far. I think women right now are not recognized for traditional roles, right? We talked about the burden women bear, right? 4.5 hours per day of unpaid care work that women do, right? That doesn't get any recognition. So that's a burden, right? But women do it because it's an accepted gender norm, right? Then you put in getting women to go and work in non-traditional roles where there are so many biases, right? So I feel like we need to really take this apart and say, yes, enabling women in traditional roles, but non-traditional roles need to happen. Otherwise, we will not progress as society. And today, what is considered a role which is accepted 20 years was not. Right?
So
And this is
So
how we need to
I was just going to say that.
Shutting down.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, you know, now age comes in and a body of experience comes in. I'm thinking it was started in the 90s. I couldn't even have this conversation.
Yeah.
I would never be able to go and sit
No
across
one
a
was
table.
that aware.
No, not forget aware. I would probably be the lone woman in a room.
और अंजुम, आप क्या आज से 20 साल पहले ये सोच सकते थे कि एडवर्टाइजिंग में, इस इंडस्ट्री में, मीडिया में इतनी खवातीन एक टेबल पे वोकल हो सकती हैं?
Vocal?
घर से parents
It
से
wouldn't be
इजाज़त
like
में,
that. Exactly.
you know,
It
so
wouldn't.
that-
But the fact is, we're having these conversations.
So-
and just coming back to what you just mentioned about non-traditional roles, you are seeing an awareness taking place, which was not there, which is very hopeful. It's a sign of hope for me that the generations that are going to follow will have that happen, and will have those opportunities which didn't exist because we are talking about what we are today, right?
So before you start, I'm just coming on Amna's your point. I think Amna, what you're saying and I'm saying are exactly the same. So what I'm saying is that equality should not be your starting point.
Not at all.
Equity should be, right? And you're right, कि subconscious level पे over a period of 500 years, it has been subconsciously instilled in us, right? So हमारा goal ये नहीं होना चाहिए कि हमको एक X number of लोग या gender या caste या say for example ethnicity एक हर एरिया में चाहिए. अगर हम equity based होंगे, so automatically equality आ ही जाएगी.
Yeah.
Automatically.
So
One-
this
one
actually,
thought, just to what Amna was saying, and we're all from that background. And I'm sitting here, so I'm a little bit wary of saying this. But when Ariel talks about share the load, great, fantastic, kudos, brilliant work. It's not her damn load. Right? It shouldn't
begin
be.
with.
Right? But in the context of the society we live in, that communication matters. Because somewhere down the line,
it
it's going to
has to be
convince
paraphrased
be
that
challenged,
way.
yeah.
अभी हम वहाँ पहुँचे नहीं है जहाँ पे जो है
has
ना
to be
it's okay for a
shown
man
that
to
way
hold
for
a laundry
people to accept
basket.
it.
So it's a journey.
Saalon-
It's a step-by-step
saalon
journey
ki,
where
Yeah.
we
So-
get
And it's
to
good
that.
that the
and it's
brands
evolution.
are talking about
I'm
it.
glad the
Yeah.
conversation is
Yeah.
going towards this very next point of curiosity for me because आमना आपने सबको यहाँ पे जो है ना ज़रा हिला दिया. I like that. So I'm again going to put this for the general forum here on the table. Equity, equality. क्या ये gender neutral concepts हैं? कि खुरम साहब आप बताएं.
I think broadly speaking, again, मेरा ख्याल है कि ये gender neutral नहीं है, right? I think उसमें जिस तरह I think Saad was also mentioning कि there are a variety of ethos अगर आप देखें society का, so there are a variety of reasons जो कि इस पूरे सब्जेक्ट को ऑल्टर करते हैं, राइट? जिसमें कल्चर बैरियर्स, रिलीजियस बैरियर्स, एजुकेशनल बैरियर्स, आई थिंक ये सारी चीज़ें बहुत ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव, आई मीन टू अगेन प्लग इन दैट वर्ड, आई थिंक नीड्स ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन. एंड आई थिंक विद दैट सेड, and I agree to again what the first point was कि it needs to be a starting point. कमर ने एक बात की numbers के ऊपर, कमर जो, so let's say, you know, if I'm an organization, corporate organization, I can set my, and a lot of companies do that, कि जी इस department में 50% females होंगी या 50% males होंगे, whatever, like company wide ही होगा. But oftentimes they ignore what it takes to get there. So there's just a number on the chart, right? So I can set कि हाँ मेरे gender specific goals हैं, but unless I go back and again fix the basics of the issues that the other gender presumably is experiencing, those numbers are just a wish, right? So one of the things that, you know, corporate company and what was my first experience with P&G, for example, they do a training called Men as Advocates for Women, and they put a bunch of males in a room for 3 days, and they just break all the biases that you've had. And for me, that was a starting point to realizing what this means, you know, versus someone telling you, okay, at the end of the year, I want to see 50% females working in your organization.
Exactly, yeah.
And then I'd go chase that by just, you know, through an interviewing process or a hiring process, versus going back and understanding, okay, what does it take for these people to get hired? And then for them to be able to enjoy the work and be able to deliver the same outcomes or outputs as other people in my organization. So I think it goes back to.
So you're right. So you know the basic concept is don't chase the
Don't
numbers.
chase the numbers.
Don't chase the numbers.
Chase-
You know, so rather than कि इस department में 50% ये होने चाहिए, वो होने चाहिए. If you work for equity, automatically
Absolutely.
That should
you
be
will
merit
reach
based.
that.
Yeah.
Reach there. So for me, taking up the question, whether it's gender neutral completely. For me, it's not only gender neutral. हम बहुत restrict कर देंगे if we talk about gender only. So within men also or within women also, we have to take into consideration the equity in terms of, say for example, the background, the cultural,
Socio-economic.
the socio-economic
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
or say for example, religious aspect, or say for example, ethnicity that I come from. So for me, it's much more bigger. And we should not restrict it just to gender. I think if we get the equity equation right, automatically everything is going to fall into place.
We bring in urban and rural. I
Exactly,
mean,
yeah.
if you have a huge community of women who are in the rural areas
Yeah.
who just because of their geographical location and because of where they're situated are just completely marginalized, which makes it so difficult for us to fathom that in 2023 you have this. How can you talk about equality and equity and not bring them into this equation as well? Because they're just completely set aside and cast aside because of the fact that they're located elsewhere. And what opportunities do you create for them? Right? So it can't be, I think personally that it definitely is gender biased, as I think that, as you just mentioned, because by the sheer nature of society, it just ends up being that way. because that's exactly how culturally we operate.
It becomes a numbers game. So
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier the around privilege and privilege shaping the conversation, shaping society. And if you look at people with disabilities, people with educational limitations,
Marginalized communities.
so yes, when you say marginalized communities, women become just numerically
Yeah.
become the largest
Yeah.
marginalized community
Absolutely.
that you can think of. So automatically, just by that sheer volume of it, it becomes a gendered conversation. If we talk equity before equality, we have to talk women before anybody else.
Exactly.
And that's why, to me, it does become a gender-led conversation, let's say.
I think there's a number. The number we need to focus on is that we all know what the economic conditions are, right? So today, if we give financial inclusion to women, right, and give this sort of empowerment, right, Pakistan's GDP goes up by 30%.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, bank will verify that, right?
Yeah.
So it's also about what is good for the collective whole. And that's why, where there are conversations around how is this a win-win, for example, if you're talking in a gender sense, how is this a win-win for men? It's a win-win for men because it's a win-win for society, right?
Yeah.
Works. And there's a really interesting study that talks about, and this is from a generational point of view, not a gender point of view, but how, for example, the younger generation is coming in and talking about well-being at the workplace, what their rights are, and actually the older generation is actually saying, well, we're benefiting from this, because when they are asking for things for themselves, is improving the organization in total, right? So the moment you start talking about things like maternity leave, right, or supporting in child care, those opportunities start opening up things for men as well, right? For the first time, we're having conversations on paternity leave, and I don't think we could have imagined a conversation around that, right?
I mean, applicable भी नहीं है, मतलब कोई concept ही नहीं है. Paternity
so
leave होता क्या है?
So actually, Amna, बिल्कुल, I think I'll just second to what she's saying कि वो जो एक journey है औरत की from when she's hired और फिर वो progression, तो उसकी ज़िंदगी आपने कैसे कैसे आसान की, conversations वहाँ पे नहीं होती कि किस तरह से हम उसको वो उसकी life at work ease कर सकते हैं, because obviously when a woman goes out and work, there's a separate fight and there's a separate thing she's doing.
The second you step out of the house,
वो एक different
it's
struggle
a struggle.
है.
It's a
Or you
constant
think
struggle to
about
come
that.
back.
You even think about getting out of the house.
या आप लेते हैं because she is as passionate as any man sitting on the table. तो आप उसके पैशन को किल नहीं कर सकते, मतलब यू विल हैव टू वो इक्विटी वाला चीज़ जो आ गई कि फिर वो आप उसकी ज़िंदगी आसान कैसे बनाएंगे.
फिर एक वो स्कूल ऑफ थॉट भी तो है ना कि भाई तुम्हें इक्वालिटी चाहिए, डील विद इट, suck it up.
That's a privilege conversation.
Yeah,
right?
again,
Yeah.
agreed.
Comes back to
Again,
the-
who
the
defines
people
equality?
the people with privilege will continue
Because
to do
then
that.
that
Because
actually
it makes the world work for them.
Yeah.
But again, that's not equality at all.
That's what I meant.
Because again,
but
that's an extra
using
work.
equality
actually
for your
misunderstood.
You end up doing
what you
yeah.
do.
It's a
For your own bias.
It's a
It's
misconception.
a misunderstood equality वाली चीज़ कि you're not
Equality है नहीं.
really actually trying to, you're not even coming from that frame of mind or frame of thought to that you want to give somebody an equal opportunity. वो तो फिर एक I think that's
misplaced
a-
concept है आपके पास.
Yeah.
इसका मतलब है इक्वालिटी का.
Yeah.
जी,
I
अब
think
आप
that's
बताओ.
Completely.
पता है, I feel gender neutral equality होनी चाहिए, but equity should be separate from all of this. Equity should be, because equity, I mean, what are we trying to say? Okay, it is related to a specific person, specific needs, and then basis on that the kind of work that they're doing, right? So उसमें gender का
न्यूट्रल
कहाँ
नहीं
है?
होगा,
नहीं है।
लेकिन वो जेंडर न्यूट्रल है. वो अलग बात है कि एट दिस पॉइंट इन टाइम हमारी नीड ये है कि जेंडर शुड बी द प्रायोरिटी इन इक्विटी इक्वेशन. दैट इज अ सेपरेट डिबेट, बट इन कॉन्सेप्चुअली टॉकिंग,
So
It's circumstantial.
yeah, it could be like talking about paternity leave.
I said this off camera, and I will say this on camera. My wife should be in this room because she's the expert on this. But talking in conversation with her, there's some things that I've realized which counter what you're talking about, which is the way that we count as society, the way that we count productivity is formal productivity that men create.
And define.
We don't talk about in agriculture in Pakistan, women's work who are working on their own farmland is completely discounted. It's not considered productive work, even though they spend like 6 hours or 8 hours a day working on farmland. It's not counted,
Yeah.
right? So they're not included in Pakistan's labor force. They're not included as part of
That's
contributors
also
to
because
GDP.
they don't get paid for it.
They don't
also.
get paid for it. You don't get paid for home care work. You don't get paid for all of this agricultural work that you're doing. So the way that the entire conversation has been framed, it's been framed from a gendered perspective. You have discounted over centuries. You've discounted the productive contribution of women's work.
So sir, that is there. So you're right. देखिए conceptually again वही वाली बात है कि हमारे लिए भी gender inequality इतनी है या inequity इतनी है कि that is our priority that we should be talking about. Simple. Conceptually, it applies to everyone. It applies to us. It applies to her. It applies to everyone in this world. Because equity is about just or being fair to every individual, to every living being, irrespective of your caste, creed, your gender, your anything. But our priority at the moment is dealing with the gender because they are the most marginalized, group in the system. So I think that is a priority.
So there's a lot of conversation going about how equity and equality are gender biased, gender led, or they are gender neutral, or literally not neutral at all. So ये जो conversations होती हैं, I mean, I've noticed that जब जैसे ये digital space में जाती हैं, right, social media में जाती हैं, they become subjected to biased commentary around them because they're so polarizing. You have certain people जो कि कुछ कहेंगे, कुछ आपके netizens होते हैं, फिर कुछ आपके keyboard jihadis होते हैं, and they kind of skew the narrative, in a way that it gets lost in all that
The
biased
actual
commentary.
purpose or actual
अब
discussion.
जैसे let's take औरत march for example, ठीक है, इस्लामाबाद हाई कोर्ट और फिर लाहौर डीसी ने जो उसके ऊपर बैन कर दिया है, उसके ऊपर वैसे petitions आ गए हैं, and the reason, official reason is also stated it to be, कि किस तरह से इस्लामिक जो है वो sentiments के against औरत march का जो पूरा एक agenda है वो it's been advocated. However, the context of Aurat March is very relevant, and if we try to really understand it, so it definitely helps, the cause when it comes to striking that equality. But thanks to the execution of it all and how people really, rallied together against it, कि oh hi, what an execution, ये क्या बदतमीजी है, ये क्या हो रहा है, तो वो जो पूरा narrative है उसका essence खो गया. वो जो cause है that got lost and everybody was talking about कि बात किस तरह की, कोई ये नहीं कह रहा कि बात क्या की. So these conversations, जैसे अब हम embracing equity की बात कर रहे हैं, तो हम यहाँ पे तो यही कह रहे हैं कि भाई आप gender से ऊपर होके सोचो, आप लोगों की ability के बारे में जो है consideration लेके उनको वो just treatment दो that will help them contribute to the equal outcome. That is what the narrative is. Do you feel कि जब ये अगर it goes out there into the digital space, do you feel that it can also be subjected to that biased commentary?
I think you've answered your own question.
But I want to know. But I want to know, Amna, what you think.
I think that the fact that something which in my mind is common sense is so controversial speaks to how far we need to go on this journey, right? Yes, there are things that are deliberately provocative, and I think that when you have a society which has been in inertia, sometimes you need the provocation to propel what needs to happen. Do I think we can solve issues of equity through Aurat March? No, right? I think what we need to focus on is financial inclusion, right? The fact that most women can't get a loan to set up a business and only 7% of businesses are owned by women. I mean, those are things we really need to change to solve the real problems.
Yeah.
But the fact is that these problems have not been solved for decades. And it leads to a point where then you need controversies. And in terms of how it gets responded to on digital, I think you kind of said it yourself earlier when you said 80% of people who come out of educated for the digital space are men, right? They're not going to like these conversations, right? Whether it's about women's sexual rights, women's educational rights, women's financial rights, they're not going to like it because people assume that rights are like this pizza, right? And you have to slice it up, and then if somebody gets a slice, women get a slice, it's less for the men, right? But that's not how society works, because sometimes when you create this sort of an ecosystem, you create a larger pool that everybody benefits from, right? So this whole conversation on अगर औरतों को हक मिल जाएगा तो मर्दों का हक कम हो जाएगा, right? Which is how sometimes this gets labeled, is actually the problem. So do I think the controversies around Aurat March specifically are bad for the cause? I think no, because I think it's not how I would lead the conversation. I would lead the conversation with, forget computer sciences, women, like the girls, right? Primary school में 48% primary education लड़कियों के लिए, 70% plus लड़कों के लिए. तो अलिफ बे पे भी आप अपनी लड़कियों को नहीं सिखा रहे. That is actually the biggest problem, right? And then that will lead to all the narrative building around it. So yes, I think that once a year little controversy is good, because I think it stirs things up and gets the conversations going. When we didn't have Aurat March, we didn't have these podcasts either, which are talking about constructive solutions. So yeah, I mean, I think hopefully we'll get to better ways of having conversations, but we have to start somewhere.
I just want to pick up on one of the topics that you just mentioned about girls going to schools. And again, I go back to rural Pakistan. They don't go to schools because the schools don't have bathrooms.
Yes.
And something as simple as a bathroom is an impediment to women's education. So if you just go ahead and get water and a bathroom in that school, in that area, you have changed the dynamic there. Okay? So then you bring in access to when you talk about the rights, then you talk about much wider rights, and justice comes into it as well. You know, and what you mean by the justice in terms of an equitable society, right? So that's a much vaster discussion. But just picking on the point of women and you raising this, and I'm going to throw it out there. I don't like celebrating International Women's Day. I think I honestly think that the day we don't celebrate it is the day we've achieved something. The Women's Commission on Human Rights or the Ministry on Women's Rights, I don't want that either. Because I don't want a special ministry to deal with me. It means that I'm not an equal member and they have to create a special entity for me. For me, I celebrate being a woman and celebrate my femininity every single day as a professional. And I don't like it. And people think, you've spoken at so many events, you've been part of it and celebrated it, for so many years, but I don't like it. I don't feel I'm treated as an equal member of society because there's a special day for me,
There's also a special tax for you.
Exactly.
Big tax.
Now, for the world we live in today, we need these.
Yeah.
We need the special treatment. We need the
That's
initiatives.
everybody needs to say.
That's what I'm saying.
Abhi ye chahiye.
Abhi chahiye, but I
Eventually, you
eventually
don't
want,
to see that.
exactly, I don't
That
want to
is the
see
eventual
it.
outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really don't want to see
right
it.
now, and again, I'm speaking from limited experience, but DEI has become such a massive focus for a lot of the bigger organizations. It's been put on the table.
Yeah.
I don't know when this will go out into the world, but yesterday the Global DEI Benchmark Awards took place in Pakistan. So even here those conversations are happening, and I feel we're on the right track. Aurat March is one piece of that puzzle. Digital conversations, the extremes, both the extremes of it are one piece of that puzzle that the whole world is dealing with, really. But all of these elements are critical to what Amna said, which is a continuing conversation around it. Right? You have to continue to make progress. You have to have gains, and that's what we're doing.
But
All
I
of
think
this
with
is
Prasad,
contributing
it's
to
also
gains.
about how that a lot of that is done. For example, if you go back to Aurat March, I think I mean, I'm not an advocate for it personally. I just feel that, be it Aurat March or be it feminism, these topics are largely misunderstood as well. And they are misunderstood for a reason, because of the way they are executed. And that really helps in shaping any kind of a narrative, be it a strong one, be it a for or against. And you can only kind of set this thing right if it is understood and if it is talked about by, say, key opinion leaders, influencers, the right people, people with the voice, people who are heard. And that is important. आप जितना अगर देखिए, if you go very anti or very polarized, then it will not be appreciated. That's the reality.
Just to that, it's only the extreme.
And it's going to be more misunderstood
but
than
Amna mentioned this,
understood.
and I completely agree. It is only the controversial statements that get picked up and magnified. The 95%
Correct.
of the conversation, 95% of those key opinion leaders and shapers and women talking about the right approach to feminism and how that should be
Something blows up a little bit more and
But
gets
I
more
agree with
Vishal,
Usman
don't
completely कि वो उसमें जो सारा
Yeah.
औरतों के positive
It seems
वो
like
lost हो
exactly.
गया।
Yes, lost.
जो
Gets
मारो
lost in the
बोले
red.
हैं।
entire
So there's one other element of it, which
But
is
that's primarily because of how it comes out in front of people. If,
This is
if
how
it
we
comes
want-
out in a
but you
positive
take
way,
there are men
I'm sure people are going to
there are
like
men
it.
waiting.
Yeah.
In the case of Aurat March, there are men online sitting and
Yes.
waiting for that one image
Exactly.
that they will take
And
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 dis-
condemn out of
distract the
condemn it.
narrative from
Yeah.
the 99% of positivity to that one.
build हुआ ही कब है?
So
From
आप-
day one,
और
Yeah.
बहुत ही
narrative has
negative
always
उसमें
But
been
who
like
shaped that
जो
narrative?
actual issues थे
No, who-
औरतों के
The
वो
question
lost
is,
हो गया
Never
उसमें।
वो
come out.
कभी
Yeah.
आए ही नहीं
who has
सामने।
shaped that narrative?
So let's talk about a similar situation. And we're all marketeers. What is clickbait?
It is that. That is.
yeah.
It's that, right? So as marketeers, we all rely on clickbait because no one will read a normal, nice blog or watch a nice video, right? So agreeing to what Amna said, you need these clickbaits, right? In today's society, and the way, as you said, information is consumed digitally, where you need to appeal to someone in 3 seconds. You have to at times use those measures to get that clickbait and to get more awareness. Now, we all know as marketeers, something with a great clickbait has 10 times more chances of being opened up and the narrative to have gone through that versus something that you would brush aside. So I'd agree with it. I think.
So Khurram, tell me one thing. Do you think so that's a good approach?
That's,
Like for example, just building on that,
Right.
going after sensationalism and all that stuff.
negative awareness.
Is it a good approach? Like for example, that's what our
How-
newspapers
how
do.
would you what,
Bad
how
news
would you
sells.
So
categorize what, like,
Bad
so-
news
so for
sells.
me-
It's as simple
I know,
as that.
so
but
for
is
me-
that a good
No, of
approach?
course not.
So
It's not a good approach.
Let's differentiate
It's not
means and
positive at
ends.
the end of the day,
Yeah,
right?
let's
It builds more
differentiate-
negativity and
Let's
you're
differentiate
harnessing
means and ends,
negativity.
right? If my end is to get to a society which is equitable, and you're questioning the approach of using a clickbait sort of a poster as an example to get more people to get aware about this. Now, so if I'm able to reach 10 times more people, and maybe 3 disagree, but 7 agree, or maybe let's say 7 disagree, 3 agree, but still I'm reaching a larger universe and convincing more people.
So,
But you're
So-
also
So-
at the
talk
same
about
time
it.
making it a harder,
It's a hard
harder
sell.
journey. It's a harder journey.
Usman, just one
It's
one
a journey
point.
that reaches far more people is the way I see it. As
Actually,
but
it
perhaps
reaches
not
more
in a
people in a
positive way.
negative way.
Sorry?
Think
but
about
perhaps
this.
not
Think about.
in a more convincing
Let's-
way.
Exactly.
Let's
Not
look
in a
at
convincing
one
way.
way.
नहीं,
way.
आपने
bad.
कोशिश तो
think-
कर ली
Then
कि
good.
वो
I think
he
depends
comes
on what
across
executions you're talking about, right? So not all executions that blow up necessarily have a bad intention or a bad execution. As he said, there are keyboard warriors sitting to translate it the way they want it to be translated.
वो
But
तो
you're
हमेशा
giving
ऐसे
no
लोग
reason
होंगे
to
वो हमेशा
translate
ऐसे
it.
लोग
अच्छा,
होंगे
अच्छा देखें ये बताएं.
We do nothing.
Yeah. So
No, it's not
No,
how
it's
it's
not
done.
that.
what is Aurat March?
It's always
I-
been
I
a
want
how
you-
and a what,
जो
right?
want-
essence था
What is Aurat
उसका,
March?
हाँ.
So let's take the most recent event that they did last year. There were female labor union workers. Did you know about them? Did you see about them, anything about them on
Nothing.
social media?
Nothing.
You didn't. They were the ones making speeches. They were the ones leading the march itself.
Right.
What you saw was 3 posters come out on social media, not from the organizers of the Aurat March,
जी, बिल्कुल.
not from
Yeah.
the people making speeches, but
Yeah.
some participants.
Yeah.
And then people online took those 3 posters and
blew it.
completely
Changed the
reshaped the narrative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there is no way for the organizers of the Aurat March to control those 3 posters.
They cannot control the 3 posters, but they do have the responsibility to actually put their correct narrative out there.
And they do. They
But
do.
how come that doesn't?
But
Because
it sounded
because
out.
you're building a
Because
narrative.
it's not,
The
because
bad
it's not
is a
clickbaity.
lot
No, but-
for
but
popularity
Because
or-
it doesn't entice the click.
No, but
But
Saad,
here's my point.
Saad, you're
No,
answering
don't
your
try.
own question. That's what we're arguing.
Yeah.
कि देखिए हुआ क्या कि वो 3 posters ने जो एसेंस
अच्छी
की औरत
चीज़ है,
मार्च
खत्म
की
कर दिया।
जो ये कह रही है
But you
वो
said
mislead
you-
कर रही है।
you were
वो
asking
किसने
us
खत्म किया? वो किसने खत्म किया? Who is
खत्म ही हो गया ना
responsible?
फिर।
But who
But
is
that's
responsible? Who is responsible for taking those 3 posters and making them the conversation? It is not the organizers of the
I
Aurat
don't
March.
agree with that. I think where there, एक second, Kamal. Where there are people who can blow 3 posters out of proportion, there are a lot of people who, if want, they
The
can also
organizers
take
maybe,
up the
yeah.
good side of that march and actually talk about that. How is it possible that people from labor union did not come in front? Or वो नहीं दिखे?
Because they don't own TV channels.
Because
because they don't own
exactly. They might
publishers.
not own TV channels, but social
मुझे
media
तो
is a
लगता है
very
इसके बाद
different
भी
But
नई
those
debate
3
शुरू होने वाली है।
posters, those 3 posters own the
Change is
social
a very
media
different
and they
space.
own the narrative.
That's-
And Amna, your point, as you mentioned, Katika, what is it that we are doing to transform that narrative?
I think we all have contributions to make, and I think where we are as a country, I think media and us as actually marketers have a huge role to play, right? I read a really interesting article and I totally agree with it. Somebody had written, and excuse me, I don't remember the name of the author, so I apologize. Somebody had written that if you watch a TV channel, there are 2 faces of women in Pakistan. The face of the woman who is in the drama, who gets beaten up, who is, you know, not taking any responsibility for anything.
In love with the
which-
furniture.
Love, you know, so there are all the cliches that you could have of a particular type of woman, right? And then you have the woman of the TV ads, right? And this is, by the way, a positive thing. The woman in the TV ad is empowered. She has someone who helps her. She's a decision maker, right? And I feel like as marketers, in a sense, by making choices on what we show women as in the communication we put out, which is worth millions and
Yeah.
millions of rupees, which millions and millions of people see. And on a very subconscious level, what people see on TV shapes how they see the world, right? So I think that there's a huge conversation that needs to be had on who is this woman and who is this working woman that we as a society want to encourage, and what do we want to do about it, right? And I mean, Aurat March and the clickbait, I mean, why do we watch and support TV shows in which it's okay to hit a woman, as an extreme example, right? And why are those shows getting ratings, and what do we as advertisers want to say on that, right? So one is, how do we stop the negative views and perceptions that are being built around women, where if a woman is outspoken and speaks of her rights, she's classified as a buri aurat, right? And how do we get conversations around the positive role women can make as working women to society, right? So I feel that this conversation, many conversations need to happen, and I'm so happy people from PAS are here, I'm so happy we are all here, right? Because the narrative will be hijacked with people with agendas if we who are representing what we think are everyday Pakistanis in some ways, right? If we don't take control and put the opposite narrative out, why don't we celebrate working women? Why don't we appreciate what she's doing, right? Why don't we have things that talk about equity in a positive way in everything that we do, right? Name 5 dramas in which we saw that, for example. I can tell you 5 ads that did it. So I feel like this is one of the places where the marketing community is actually leading some of the positive conversation. And I think that gives me pride. But I feel like a lot more needs to be done on narrative building. And that's how we keep the conversation on things that really matter for women and matter for society.
Kamar, you'd like to add something?
Yeah, so I think I'll build on what Amina said. I think for me, and not only personally, but representing the organization that I belong to, I think these are the two things that I strongly believe in. Perhaps I cannot control the content directly, what has been shown on the media, but indirectly we can shape it. So one is, we've always believed in the power of communication. हमारे पास हम तकरीबन 50 billion spend करते हैं or more, 70 billion हम spend करते हैं, and we can on a subconscious a lot more, and we can change that narrative. ठीक है? And secondly, by not supporting the content which is propagating the stereotypes, I think that is indirectly controlling the content. I think for me, if we're able to do that, that is something which is in our hand. Other than what we are doing in our personal capacity or in our personal organization, I think if we do it, perhaps we should be able to, create some impact.
Uzma?
I think first of all, we should be celebrating not just working women, all women. I think all of them deserve to be celebrated. And secondly, in terms of shaping narratives, I think it's great that TV ads and marketers try to show an empowered woman in their advertising, but the unfortunate side is following जो है वो है आपकी TV dramas की. That's because they come so regularly that आपकी एक जो एक association build होना है, unfortunately ads के साथ association नहीं build हो सकती है, and it is what it is. But yeah, I completely agree कि I think our channels, they need to be conscious of the fact that we should be careful, and we should, because we have the power to drive a particular narrative. So if they stop showing certain things like beatings and this and that, they have a huge power. And I was just recently seeing a drama, and a man hit a girl, but immediately in the next scene they were like, I feel so bad, I've never abused a woman. This is what that guy, the hero, actually said. And it was good in the sense that they made sure that he realized it. A lot of times you wouldn't even see somebody, a protagonist even, or anybody would even realizing this in the dramas. And I think so channels पे मुझे लगता है मीडिया पे आपका बहुत बड़ी जिम्मेदारी है मीडिया पे, because they can really flip a narrative, show the positive side or the negative side or whatever. But I think channels पे बहुत ज़्यादा जिम्मेदारी, because देखिए लोग वो देखते हैं जो आप उन्हें दिखाते हैं. There was a time जब reality reenactments आ रहे थे बहुत ज़्यादा, and then I think they got shut down or something, and that's fine. People will see what you show them, So it is your responsibility to show them good content, quality content, something that actually can help build a society, not destroy one. So that's what I would say.
I wish we do that.
I
think channels.
But there's just a little nuance. So I would actually say that channels, yes, but as advertisers, we pay for those shows, right?
Exactly.
Stop
You're right.
advertising.
एक
on them.
step
And
over
this is like an eye-opening example for me. I mean, when we did Share the Load, we did a media plan, and 2 days later, someone kind of sent me a snapshot that said Ariel powers your sponsors Nagin. And then we consciously went back and thought about it.
Yeah.
Right? Because we don't go down to the degree of saying कि कौन से program पे spot चलेगा and so on and so forth. But after that, we took a conscious call of white labeling all such content. So PNG no longer sponsors any such content anymore. And I think that ultimately means low revenue for those specific shows, and then finds a way. Now other advertisers may step in, but I think you
can play your part.
You can play your part and get out of it. So I think we can definitely have, as Kamal was saying, have an influence financially, because I mean the world runs on finance, right? To kind of move away from the sort of topics that we're talking. The other thing is also, from an insight point of view, is also important to understand where the society is, right? So probably the society, before we start talking about digital equity and equality. Let's start from schools, which you guys mentioned. Pichhle dino, there's a study that came out, 80% of doctors are female,
Yes.
but 20%
20% end up
Actually end up practicing, yeah.
So there are a lot of smaller puzzles to solve, and those steps that we need to take. Rural is a classic example. If we look at ourselves versus the developed world, we are far, far behind. Right? We are probably 153rd on the gender neutrality index. So I think there are steps that, as a society, in all of our space, we need to take to be better than we were yesterday.
Just because we're
Yes, sir.
exposed to it doesn't mean that we jump to
And
that
I think I'll just
step.
build on to what Khurram is saying कि हम education से भी पहले शायद घर पे आ जाएं. So basic तो आपकी start हुई आपकी जहाँ पे आपके घर में quality आप दे दें, equity दे दें अपने बच्चों को. And you start reshaping the narrative there only. बेटी ही नहीं होगी जो घर का काम करेगी, हाँ. So आपको because हम उस society में रह रहे हैं जहाँ सालों 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 से घर का काम लड़की ने ही करना है और घर का नाश्ता लड़की ने ही बनाना है. लड़का खाएगा, भाई खा लेगा, लेकिन तो वो नैरेटिव बिल्डिंग आपको शायद आज जब अपनी जनरेशन को आप करेंगे तो आज से कुछ 20-25 साल बाद वो ट्रेंड्स आपको नज़र आने शुरू होंगे कि हाँ वो एक्सेप्टेंस आएगी रोल्स में, वो सपोर्ट सिस्टम मिलेगा औरत को जो उसे घर में चाहिए, जो उसे दफ्तर में चाहिए. व्हेन यू टॉक अबाउट इक्विटी, अगर मुझे दफ्तर में वो सपोर्ट नहीं मिलेगा, so how am I going to progress?
And I think this digital is a very, very good medium for this, because I think those conversations that you sometimes would be hesitant to have in face-to-face with somebody, you could create safe zones and digital bubbles where those conversations could start and have those open conversations like we are having here today, but actually make it for the people who should be impacted in rural areas of Pakistan. If they're able to watch a YouTube drama, they should be able to have access to a conversation like this, I think.
And also washrooms at schools.
Well, I would talk about not.
I mean, that really hurt me. Okay,
exactly. When think about a 6-year-old girl, because वो bathroom नहीं हो जा नहीं सकती. But that's but I'm saying that digital can play a huge role in transforming this narrative, because you're invisible. Okay, and that little bit of invisibility gives you a little bit of a safeguard or a safe space for you to actually voice your opinion on it, where you would not be able to perhaps say that in the office, or you wouldn't be able to say it at school. You have that sort of area where you can have those conversations. I think that's a potential for this space, that you could actually transform the narrative by bringing people together there. They've done it for Palestine and Israel, so why not?
Saad, you'd like to add something to our closing
I think
question?
We started off talking about this last round on the role of marketing. Marketing people are the most woke people in any organization, right? So we're the low-hanging fruit on conversion to, hey, treat everyone with equity and give more opportunity to the marginalized. There's a role for us to play internally within organizations to drive that thinking within people, and that's the thinking that then permeates home with those people. I work for an organization that employs 21,000 people across the world, right? And for us, even in incremental gains matter. So we're talking about increasing our female participation by 2% in 2 years, right? And that's transformative almost.
Yeah.
And that's where the organization role is expanded beyond marketing. That's where all of these notions of what is acceptable for women start to change. That is, women still are going into medical fields or becoming teachers because that is an extension of what they do at home anyway. तो वो बाहर जाके भी वही काम कर लें, right? So breaking them away into fields that are not caregiving space, right? Those things will matter. So having this conversation then extend from these organizations who are hiring people out of college, so having them extend into educational institutions. That's where I see the role of corporate Pakistan, which is the narrative needs to change somewhere. It's not going to change at the base with all people. It's not going to change online. It's going to change with some of the woke people, younger people, marketing people, creatives, whatever, driving that within their circle of influence,
Yeah.
and then expanding that, or maybe having some sort of a domino effect. But it is, like I said, it is incremental gains. So it's not going to be, hey, by the end of this year, we're going to be a very equitable country, right? It will take decades.
We have to start somewhere.
Yes.
It's
And I
a-
like-
It's
a
taken centuries to
process.
get where we are.
Yeah.
It's going to take decades to get
I
where we
don't
want to
think
be.
so. I think we're going to leapfrog. We always do. I honestly think that you actually, because you have
Right,
those
we're gonna
conversations,
The
I mean,
tipping
you
point.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's
No,
what
Which
I'm
sounds I
saying.
like.
I'm
Now
saying
it's
it's
going to
sense-
start with the younger people.
Yeah,
All the young people are going to make the
So देखिए यहाँ पे
I like
इतनी
that.
सारी
but we're
खवातीन
the
बैठी
decision
हैं,
makers, na?
but आप देखें इतनी सारी खवातीन बैठी हैं, and I'll just put a question जो हम हमेशा हर साल सोचते हैं कि आप टॉप पोजीशंस पे हमेशा आदमी को ही देखेंगे, CEOs.
I disagree.
एक second, let me just finish. So 80%
Definitely,
या
sure.
90% of the organizations, मैं marketing fraternity की अभी बात कर रही हूँ, you will see men, ठीक है? मुझे आप नाम बता दें उन 5 औरतों या 6 औरतों के जो उन positions पे बैठी हैं.
But
There will be
majority, you're
exceptions.
right.
Supposed to be
Majority,
the
you're
same
right.
members.
To your
Yeah,
point,
correct.
to your
95,
point, because we
Okay.
can name 5 people,
Yeah.
those 5 people are the exception to the rule.
Yeah, they're exceptions.
The rule is there.
So देखिए ना
But
आपके
hopefully-
वो मैं काम
And so
नहीं
this
कर
is the
रही
whole
हूँ.
thing about that
Changing.
the rules
So
should
अब आप
change.
देखें कि वो change होने में उस narrative को change होने में बड़ा time
I think
लगेगा.
equity जब आ जाएगी तो
But I
hopefully
think
5
that-
years, 10
I
years down
think
the road we'll see
it's
more.
safe to
It's
say
a-
to this
it's a-
conversation.
yeah,
I mean, since we're having the
thought-provoking,
I think
It's a time-taking,
Yeah.
sadly a time
But
taking.
it's,
So-
it's a
Because
worth,
ये
but it's worth it.
sacrifices कोई सोचता
Yeah, yeah.
नहीं है, वो जब औरत घर से निकलती है तो वो she has to go through a lot of
Right.
struggle.
Just to get up and
तो CEO
leave.
तक
Yeah.
पहुंचने के लिए what kind of sacrifice a man could give versus a woman.
Acha, I think sacrifices are on both fronts.
जी जी आपने
so
बहुत
I
एक
completely
moderator की तरह
So I do
I
feel
Yeah.
sacrifices are made on both
easy.
fronts.
So मैं एक चीज़ कहूँ कि
Women and men
multi-
both. Their nature could be different. That is where equity comes in.
Yeah. So I don't know. I will a little.
That's a
disagree
little,
on that.
you know, food for thought. Thank you guys.
can I do a brand plug right at the end?
Please do.
So I think that it's about just starting with whatever we do, right? And so as a lot of you know, there's a project very close to my heart, and since it's Symmetry Group, I can talk about it. So we did these set of nursery rhymes for children, right? And this is for little children, class 1-2 के बच्चों के लिए, called Luko Kahani. And one of the poems we put in is called Kuchu Kuchu Kachwa. Okay? And the idea of Kuchu Kuchu Kachwa is कि कुचू कुचू कछवा कैसे चलता है, हल्के 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 चलता है, right? So there's this tortoise, right, and he's obviously, or a turtle, he's struggling to walk on land because that's not what his fair playing ground is, right? But the moment you take that turtle and you put him into water, he's your fastest swimmer. And I think the reason I wanted to talk about that specific poem is that yes, there are things that we do at a corporate level, but at a very human level, if you start teaching children that different animals, different people, you have to understand where they're coming from and what they need to excel. And you create that space, right? So it's a little poem. It's a little poem for a 5-year-old. But if a 5-year-old reads it and internalizes, and then maybe 40 years later he's the CEO of a company and he understands, I think that's another way of making a contribution. So I think the contributions we make are small, but I think we need to keep making them.
Yeah, true.
I agree, and I think it is these little steps that will help us transform, you know, narratives. जो कि काफी, how would I put it? They're just very, you know, uptight and very strict in their own approach. Thank you guys for coming, and
having
I
us.
think Khurram, your point where you mentioned ke media or the media spend can actually also help transform narratives. I think it's a podcast on its own, and Uzma, you should definitely be there. So, really enjoyed the points you guys all brought to the table. I think सबके लिए कुछ ना कुछ है जो वो इससे ले सकते हैं, understand कर सकते हैं. Maybe a lot of us who would definitely watch it can build on it. They can tell us, no, maybe you're wrong, maybe you're right, but at least we have opened that, floor for conversation for people to come and contribute in terms of really adding to what we are trying to achieve here. Equity ho ya equality ho, I don't think so that we can achieve it if we don't see ourselves and recognize ourselves as humans first. If we see each other as equals, I think only then we can be fair with each other as well. And this is what equips us all to not only transform narratives, but also possibilities. So thank you. This was Symmetry Group's Women's Day Special, Narratives Transformed.
Thank you.
Thank you.